Hi guys, I hope you're well and welcome to episode 159 of the James Layton Fitness Podcast. Now in this specific episode we'll be discussing why you should be training body parts twice per week. Now this is quite a controversial topic because if you've followed any fitness information online, more than likely you've found some information about training body parts just once per week. So for example, you might do legs on one day, chest on another day, shoulders on another day, arms on another day, back on another day. You may just train body parts once per week. And you've probably seen some incredible physiques, both male and female, online who train this way. And I'm going to tell you why you really need to be training body parts at least twice per week. I think the first thing you need to consider is a lot of the individuals that have incredible physiques as training body parts once per week, a lot of these are taking anabolic steroids, and essentially if you're taking drugs you can pretty much train however you wish and you're going to get incredible results. And I think that's probably where the problem arises. You'll get natural trainees, both female and male, who see these incredible physiques and they assume that it's the training that got them results. The reality is it was just drugs, good genetics, and they were consistent with something over a period of time. And something I'm going to talk about later in this podcast is with regards to training, it's not like one training program doesn't work and the other one does. Both will work, but both will work to varying degrees. One will be more optimal and therefore will get you to your results much quicker than the other less optimal approach. But both will essentially work as long as you're consistent. But if you listen to this podcast, I presume you want to shortcut your success. You want to get to your goals as quickly as possible, and by doing what I'm about to tell you will definitely allow you to do that. The first big reason why you want to be training body parts twice per week is essentially it just makes it easier to accumulate more volume within the week. So as mentioned many times before, the evidence is very clear now that volume is the biggest determining factor for influencing muscle growth, with the caveat the load is heavy enough. And that therefore means the total tonnage being moved within each individual session. So volume is basically sets times reps times loads. It's really the total amount of work. So the load is heavy enough and volume is going up gradually over time, and you're recovering from that volume, then you're going to be, if you've got a calorie surplus in place, you're going to be building more muscle, because volume is the real driving factor for influencing muscle growth. That doesn't mean you should just be training 3-4 hour sessions just because you're not going to be able to recover from that. So it's really about doing enough volume so you're doing more than what you did previously, but not too much that you can't recover from. So it's finding that balance. But that's the first big reason why training body parts twice per week, because you're basically training multiple body parts within each session. It just makes it easier to get more volume within the week, because you'll be training that body part later in the week, so you can easily add in multiple sets within both of those sessions to increase volume. Whereas if you're just training body parts once per week, you're really trying to cram in as many sets as possible, and that becomes an issue in terms of session length, but also in terms of your strength as well, because if you're cramming in a huge amount of sets within one session for just one body part, you're going to get fatigued towards the end of the session. That therefore means that your strength is going to decline towards the end of the session. Whereas if you're training body parts twice per week, because you're essentially splitting the number of sets in half, ultimately you'll be stronger throughout all of those working sets, having 2 sessions per week as opposed to 1, because you're not seeing that fatigue later in the session. Because you're doing less sets per individual session, you're going to be fresher for all of those working sets, and therefore you're going to be stronger. And therefore by default, just by keeping the same number of sets, you're going to be, your volume will likely be higher as well, because you'll be stronger within all of those working sets. But in addition to that, it's just easier to add more sets into each individual session to increase volume even more. The next big reason is you need to realize that weight training is a skill, especially your big compound exercises, things like squats, deadlifts, bench press, overhead press, and that skill needs to be learned. That skill needs to be refined and practiced. And the great thing about training body parts at least twice per week is you can practice these lifts multiple times per week. You're getting that neurological adaptation, those motor patterns are going to be more refined, and that's going to help with strength gains and volume gains further down the road. Because if you're practicing an exercise more frequently, traditionally that will mean it just makes it easier to make strength gains and volume gains on that exercise, because there is a neurological component to especially compound exercises. If you're practicing them more frequently, it just makes it easier to make strength and volume gains over time. The next big reason is essentially body parts recover much quicker than you may have first believed. They'll recover within 24 to 48 hours, and that therefore means that if you're just training body parts once per week, for most of the week, that body part is not growing. It's going to be recovered within 24 to 48 hours, and therefore if you're just hitting it once per week, most of that week it's just going to be not growing because you've only stimulated it once. In addition to that, you're also stimulating muscle protein synthesis more frequently throughout the week as well. So hopefully you can see some of the big benefits of training body parts multiple times per week. In addition to that, another big benefit is it kind of forces you to focus mainly on compound exercises because you're going to have less total sets within each session per body part, because ultimately you're going to be training more body parts per session. It forces you to really focus on those big heavy compound exercises, which these are the exercises that really allow you to gain the most amount of strength and volume over time. So this is applicable for males and females, whether you're in a bulking phase or a cutting phase. Within the cutting phase, it just allows you to maintain more volume and strength better within the phallus phase, but within a bulking phase, it makes it easier to increase volume and strength over time. And another final point I just wanted to make with regards to training body parts 2-3 times per week versus just going back to once per week. As mentioned at the start of the podcast, it's important to note with training that any program will get results as long as you're consistent over time, but we want to try and strive for what's more optimal, because that's going to get us to our goal faster. So again, going back to the point I was making earlier about, well, hang on a second, this guy looks incredible, he trains body parts once per week. Well, that could be for a number of reasons. One, it could be because of drugs. Second, because they're just consistent with that over time. And then thirdly, I'd argue that they could have got even better results if they were training body parts multiple times per week. They could achieve that physique in a much shorter time frame. And a good analogy is, let's just say, for example, there's a door frame, and one person just walks straight through the door within just a couple of seconds. The next individual decides to do 100 star jumps, 20 press ups, 10 burpees. He does 100 circles, and he does this for, let's say, 20 to 30 minutes, and then he walks through the door. Both people walked through the door. Both of them essentially achieved the end result they were after. So going back to the training component, let's say, for example, they achieved their genetic potential, but one individual got there significantly quicker with less effort, less time committed, and in a much more efficient manner, whereas a second person was doing all this other nonsense that didn't really help them achieve their goals, but they still got through the door. And that's the same with training. When you see someone who's trained for 10-15 years, even if they are training suboptimally, they're still going to have a pretty good physique just because they've been consistent and they've stuck with something over a chronic period of time. But that's not to say they couldn't have achieved those goals significantly faster, and they couldn't have achieved better results if they'd actually focused on a more optimal approach, again training body parts multiple times per week. So hopefully that analogy helps, as both people are getting through the door, both people are achieving their genetic potential, but one person's getting there much quicker, more efficiently, with less effort. So thank you very much for listening. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page called free ebook, and you can download that immediately. If you're still yet to download the podcast, please do, so you don't miss an episode. We're very close to the 100,000 download mark, so thank you very much for those who've been listening throughout the journey. I think the podcast has been, I think it's 3 years now since we've been doing this podcast, so thank you very much if you've been one of those avid listeners listening every single week. Thank you very much. I'll speak to you soon.